Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to each of our witnesses for being here. You're an insightful group, and you've got a lot of information to share with us, and we really appreciate that. Mr. Powell, I'd like to start with you.
Yes, sir.
So, do I understand from your comments a minute ago, would you agree that, is it fair to say that our current video entertainment marketplace is being governed largely by laws passed in 1992?
Absolutely it is, yes.
And 1992 was a good time. I remember it well. It was a different era, though. You know, we didn't really have the internet. Ordinary people in ordinary circumstances didn't have access to anything even akin to the internet. If you wanted to watch a movie that wasn't airing on cable or broadcast television, or perhaps if you were lucky enough to have a satellite television system, then you'd go to Blockbuster. And typically, you'd go there maybe looking for Adventures in Babysitting, and that was rented out, so you'd have to watch Iron Eagle 4. Nobody knew what Iron Eagle 4 was, but they watched it anyway and pretended to like it.
Go with Say Anything every time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Does that technological world in any way reflect the way Americans consume video entertainment today?
No, it doesn't. I mean, we have a chart, which I'd be happy to share with you, talking about then and now. And I think law is only as good as the technical, economic, and market predicates on which it's built. An enormous premise built into the 92 Act is that the cable industry has 98% of all the video viewing market, which candidly it did. When you said it was a good time, it was a particularly good time for the cable industry. But that share has fallen all the way down to 56% today. Back then, we owned 50 or more percent vertically of all the content that was aired on those networks. Today, that number is single digits. So there's been an enormous transformation, and more importantly, the rapid innovation that's brought about by internet-fueled services really has upended the model altogether.
Indeed. Mr. Smith, one of the things we've seen since then is the development of OTT services. Yeah. Those didn't exist back then, did they? And the technology for providing them wasn't accessible, and so there was no reason for them to exist.
Correct.
But you'd agree that they've changed the marketplace today.
Totally, and I think that's you zeroed on the reason where we asked for Stella to sunset. The technology exists, making it unnecessary. The competition exists that didn't exist then. And the harm is very real now as a matter of public policy to local communities.
So should OTTs be somehow folded into the 1992 legislative framework?
I can't speak to that. I haven't considered that, but what I'm saying is it's filling a niche where people want to watch video on other platforms that currently are not available through cable or broadcast.
Right.
By the way, they should be available through broadcast, but the companies bar that.
I guess what I'm seeing is we've got these two separate frameworks. One is operating with 1992 technology and regulated with 1992 laws. Another one is operating with cutting-edge technology that operates in a different world and has resulted in substantial innovation, cost reductions to the consumer. And to me, that suggests that we ought not try to hobble the part of the market that is thriving through technological innovation with a legislative framework meant for another era. An era when, I would add, we had just recently discovered that Milli Vanilli was kind of a fraud. It wasn't really sad to me, but, you know, some people got bent out of shape on that. Okay, let me ask both of you now. Mr. Smith and Mr. Powell, you can answer in whatever order you would prefer. Is there room for reform in the video marketplace? And if we're talking about legislative reform, what key principles should drive that?
I believe what key principles should drive the reform that we're asking for is a recognition that the world has changed, that Stellar, which is over 30 years old, is out of date, should lapse, and some of the provisions that may still have some merit should not be held hostage to this bill. They can be dealt with separately. And my own view is, well, I'm not for regulation and all of that, but I am for markets. But you have half of the video industry, you know, shackled by old regulations and statutes, and the other completely unfettered. And I would just simply note in my own political experience that as social media began to explode and video began, our civil discourse began to deteriorate as well. And I don't have the answer to that, but I am just saying that we would ask for a level playing field. And I would note that what is really important in this age of charges of fake news is that somebody is still doing journalism. Broadcasters are doing it on a local and a national level. And if we care about the news being about Utah senators in Utah, then I think you need to look about how are the revenue streams to broadcasters being damaged, because when you damage those, you damage localism. And then the news is just national and not about the local civic information. So I think we deliver a durable public value that should be respected and supported.
Mr. Chairman, could I have Mr. Powell answer the same question, then I'll close. Mr. Powell?
Yes, Senator. I'd offer you sort of a schematic of how to approach the problem. I think I would start with modernizing and recontextualizing the technical, economic, and factual predicates, right? What are the technologies used today to deliver video signals as compared to 1992? You know, what are the economic realities of the modern marketplace, both in context of how traditional providers are monetizing their services as well as the new entrants? And one thing we haven't mentioned is the new entrants are some of the biggest companies in the history of the industrialized world, many of whom have massive amounts of capital and access to other sources of monetizing that pale, you know, make our services pale in comparison. So I think getting that factual predicate correct is step one. Step two is harmonizing the incongruity. I could go through chapter and verse of rules that apply to cable but don't apply to satellite, rules that apply to satellite that don't apply to broadcasting, rules that apply to broadcasting of which none apply to the modern new entrants. It's just incoherent, ultimately, to have a regulatory framework where you can't reconcile from the eyes and ears and perspective of a consumer the varying regulatory environments when the consumer sees all of those as compelling substitutes of each other.
Well said. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.